Napoleon, a name synonymous with military brilliance, political acumen, and sheer willpower. At the peak of his power, he dominated continental Europe, leaving many to wonder if he could conquer the entire world. But Napoleon's story didn't have a fairy tale ending. So how did this ambitious leader who once marched across Europe undefeated meet his demise? Let's find out. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, stood at the precipice of his most audacious plan yet, the invasion of Russia. Despite the size and ferocity of Mother Russia, Napoleon believed he could tame this wild beast. But what led him to this fateful decision? Napoleon's relentless ambition was the driving force behind his actions. Ever since he came to power in France, he had been expanding his empire, crushing his enemies, and rewriting the rules of diplomacy. But Russia's Tsar Alexander I had become a thorn in his side. Their conflicting interests over the control of the European continent created a rift that neither leader was willing to bridge. Napoleon needed to neutralize this threat, and he saw in Russia's vastness a challenge he couldn't resist. On June 1812, the Grande Armée, Napoleon's mighty army, embarked on its journey eastwards. Comprising over 600,000 men, it was a force like no other that had ever set foot on Russian soil. The Russians, aware of the impending storm, had retreated into the vast expanse of their country, adopting a scorched earth policy that denied Napoleon's army food and shelter. As the French advanced, they found themselves battling not only the Russian army, but also the elements and the unforgiving landscape itself. As the summer sun blazed, the Grande Armée struggled through dense forests and across open fields. The men were weary, their supplies dwindling. But Napoleon, ever the strategist, pushed forward, hoping for a decisive victory that would break the Russian spirit. However, fate had other plans. On September 14, 1812, Napoleon's troops entered Moscow, a city that was largely abandoned by its inhabitants. Instead of finding the grand welcome he had anticipated, he was greeted by smoldering ruins, a testament to the Russians' scorched earth strategy. With Moscow in ruins and winter fast approaching, Napoleon realized the futility of continuing the war. He ordered his troops to retreat, hoping to return in the spring with renewed strength. However, the retreat turned into a nightmare. The Grande Armée, once a symbol of French might, was decimated by cold, hunger, and disease. By the time they crossed the Niemen River back into Poland, less than 100,000 men remained. The mighty Grand Army, broken and demoralized, was a shadow of its former self. News of the disaster spread like wildfire across Europe. The other powers who had been wary of Napoleon's dominance saw their opportunity and acted swiftly. The coalition was reformed with Prussia, Austria, Britain, and Sweden joining forces to march on France. Napoleon, though weakened, was still the brilliant tactician who had dominated Europe for years. In the battles of Ligny, Quatre Bras, and Wavre, he showcased his military genius, defeating the Prussians and nearly annihilating the British force under the Duke of Wellington. But despite his victories, the odds were stacked against him. The coalition forces were vast, and their resolve was strengthened by each passing day. Moreover, they learned from their past mistakes, avoiding direct confrontations with Napoleon, and instead harassing his supply lines, targeting his weak points, and waiting for the opportune moment to strike. On October 18, 1813, the coalition forces closed in on Leipzig in what became known as the Battle of Nations, the largest battle fought in Europe until World War I. Over 600,000 soldiers clashed in one of the bloodiest battles in history. As cannon fire shook the ground and bayonets glinted in the sunlight, Napoleon found himself surrounded. Though he fought valiantly, even his brilliance could not overcome the combined forces of Europe. By the time the smoke cleared, the French army had suffered a crushing defeat. With the news of his defeat at Leipzig, Napoleon knew that the end was near. As his enemies advanced on Paris, he made a desperate gamble. He appointed his wife, Marie-Louise, as regent, a move designed to rally the French people around their empress while he fled to safety. On April 6, 1814, after 5 days of fighting, Paris fell. The French people, exhausted by the war and torn between their loyalty to Napoleon and their desire for peace, welcomed the coalition forces as liberators. Napoleon, realizing that he had lost the support of his people, abdicated the throne on April 11, 1814. He was exiled to the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy, ending his 14-year-long reign. As Napoleon departed for exile, the European powers gathered at the Congress of Vienna to redraw the map of Europe and ensure that the balance of power would never again be threatened by a single ruler. Napoleon, however, had other plans. On February 1815, taking advantage of a storm, he escaped from Elba and landed in France. Word of his return ignited a fire in the hearts of many French soldiers and citizens who still remembered the glory days of the Napoleonic era. As he traveled across France, crowds flocked to see him, eager to hail their emperor as he went to Paris. Many soldiers who had deserted the Bourbon cause returned to Napoleon's banner, recognizing in him a far stronger and more charismatic leader than the reinstated King Louis XVI. Within days, Napoleon had raised a new army, reorganized the government, and was back in the Tuileries Palace. The king fled to Normandy and the European powers were thrown into turmoil. The 100 Days were upon them. In those 100 days, Napoleon proved that though he had lost much, he had not lost everything. The rest of Europe, caught off guard by Napoleon's return, scrambled to mobilize their armies, but they were slow to do so. Napoleon was quick to take advantage of this. Aware that he didn't have much time, he launched a surprise attack on the Low Countries, where Prussian and Dutch forces were stationed. His goal was clear: divide and conquer before they could unite. He scored several victories, forcing the Prussians to retreat. Then came Waterloo. Today, the name evokes images of utter defeat and despair. But in the early hours of June 1815, it was just another battlefield. The rain-soaked field stretched before Napoleon, mirroring the stormy weather in his heart. He faced the Duke of Wellington's British and the Prussian forces under General Blücher. It was a force of roughly 72,000 men, a fraction of what he once commanded. Despite the odds, Napoleon attacked. For hours, his troops battled, pushing the British back, but they were tenacious. As the day wore on, the Prussians arrived, throwing their full force behind the British assault. Napoleon's soldiers, already exhausted, were overwhelmed. By 8 p.m., it was over. The French were routed, fleeing in all directions. Napoleon, wounded and disheartened, rode away from the battlefield. A heavy price had been paid on both sides. Over 40,000 men were either killed or wounded. The great conqueror, the man who had once marched across Europe undefeated, had met his match. Captured at last, he was taken to a remote island in the South Atlantic, St. Helena. There he spent his final years in exile, living in a small cottage, reflecting on his glorious victories and bitter defeats. He died on May 5, 1821, a lonely figure on a remote island. Though his body rests in St. Helena, his spirit lives on in the annals of history. So why did Napoleon lose? Napoleon's downfall can be attributed to a combination of factors. His ambition, which once drove him to greatness, led him to overreach, first with the invasion of Russia, and then with his return from exile. He underestimated the resilience of his opponents and the resolve of the people he had ruled over. His inability to adapt to the changing political landscape and the emergence of new military tactics also played a role. Finally, the sheer size and determination of the coalition against him proved impossible to overcome. Despite his brilliance, Napoleon was just one man against a united Europe. Napoleon's story is a reminder that even the greatest of leaders can fall. It's a cautionary tale of ambition, reminding us that the relentless pursuit of power without empathy and restraint can lead to devastating consequences. But it's also a story of courage and resilience, showing us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one man with a dream can change the world. So what do you think? What was the biggest factor in Napoleon's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.